Do you like the idea of killing large swaths of enemies with a single press of a button? What about the idea of killing bosses from the safety and comfort of range? If either of those things sound good, then this build is absolutely for you. Before I get started, there's 3 things I actually want to make note of. To start, this is a late game weapon. If you want to use it early, you should have someone drop it for you or already be on a new game cycle. Number 2 is that the skill has a long charge up time. If you're right up on top of a boss's face, you're probably not gonna have a good time. And finally, number 3, which kind of coincides with number 2, is that you're going to remain stationary. This can be a problem, as it will open you up to a whole slew of attacks that you aren't ready for. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into it. First things first is our main weapon, which is going to be the Death Ritual Spear. You can find this up north in the mountaintops of the Giants by killing the Deathrite Bird nearby Castle Sol. The 2 closest sites of grace are going to be both the Snow Valley Ruins Overlook as well as the Castle Sol site. Moving on to our buffing weapons, we'll be using the Cane Sword, which is one of the lightest weapons that you can put this skill on, with seppuku, which I'll explain later why that's important. Next up is going to be a standard dagger, also one of the lightest weapons that you can put this skill on using the Golden Vow skill. Due to a lack of faith as well as endurance, this will be our main aura buff. Closing things off finally is going to be a staff. You should either use the Carrion Regal staff or the Astrologer's staff, whichever, or as using the Lusat staff will grant you 0 benefits. Moving on to our armor, which will be the first instance of why using seppuku makes sense, we'll be using the White Mask. The White Mask will add 10% extra damage just for having blood loss nearby. So when we use seppuku on ourselves, we'll be applying blood loss and we'll get that 10% buff right away. The buff we gain from the blood loss only lasts 20 seconds, so we should usually use it at the end of our cycle. It is also worth noting that you should not kill Mohg in the Mohgwyn Palace, as doing so will lock you out of getting the armor set, which will lock you out of this helmet. Earliest you can get to the Mohgwyn Palace is by doing Vari's questline and using the item that he gives you to teleport to the Mohgwyn Palace. My next piece is going to be Fia's Robe. You could use the Spellblade chest, which will buff Spearcaller Ritual, but for roleplayer purpose, I just felt like wearing Fia's Robe. I also do not have enough endurance or weight left that would allow me to wear something heavier for more poise. Our last 2 pieces come from the same set, which is going to be the Spellblade set. You can get this from completing Roger's questline and progressing it to the point where he dies. We'll get 2% more magic damage per piece of armor worn towards our Ash of War, so wearing these 2 pieces make the most sense. Before going over our stat allocation, we do have Talismans, and we are starting with the Shard of Alexander, which is going to buff our weapon skills by 15%. Next up, we'll be using the Magic Scorpion Charm, which will be buffing our magic damage by 12%, which our Spearcaller Ritual will benefit from. Following that is going to be the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, which is the other main reason why we're using seppuku. This will give us another 20% towards our damage when there is blood loss nearby. And finally, closing things off, we are using the Carrion Filigreed Crest. Realistically, you can put anything here like a +2 resource or elemental talisman, but I found that having 25% reduced cost towards my FP skills is pretty helpful. For our physic, we'll be using the Magic Shrouded tier as well as the Intelligence tier, as this will give us another significant boost towards our damage. And finally, we're using Terra Magica, our one and only spell. This will be giving us a nice chunky 35% boost towards any magic damage, and that means our Spearcaller Ritual will be affected by it. Our stat spread is actually pretty simple. You can take it up to 200, but I personally don't like doing that, so this build is tailored towards 150. I leveled up Vigor all the way up to 50, gives me a nice 1700. I don't feel like I need any more. Again, you can move stats around or go for a higher level, but this is what I preferred. Our mind is at 35, which takes us to a nice flat 200, letting us spam our Spearcaller Ritual as much as we want to. Both our strength and endurance are 14, though we don't need 14 strength. It opens us up to being able to use its R1 and R2, as well as its Ash of War one-handed without it being totally stupid. We also don't need extra high endurance, as we're not looking for higher poise pieces of armor. We're far enough away that we don't have to worry about that all the time, and being hit isn't necessarily an issue because of that. Our dex being 20 is literally only because that's all the dex we need to be able to use this weapon. And finally, the last stat that we're leveling up is going to be Intelligence. We're pumping everything else that we have into there so we can juice out the last little bit of damage that we can get. And I already know what you're thinking. Why are we still running 80 int when we have a +10 in our physic? We could only just run 70. Well, realistically, when we're fighting bosses, we could just take out that +10 and we're going to replace it with the hidden tier that'll reduce our FP costs completely. And for our last 2 stats, we're doing absolutely nothing to them. Arcane is absolutely useless to this build, and Faith isn't a necessity. Yes, when you push up to 200, you can put some points in to be able to use the Golden Vow incantation rather than using the Golden Vow skill. But as I've locked this build to 150, there's no space for that kind of faith. That's pretty much the end of this build, and if you hate my editing as much as I do, please let me know down below. I'm gonna go ahead and just let the video finish of me killing Renala, so I hope you enjoy.